So with that being said, we have some special presenters here tonight, some very special people that I would like to invite here on the stage. So the first one we're going to have here is Dr. Jonathan Newman. He's a familiar face around these parts. I'm sure you guys have seen him here in various conferences and things before, as well as different things like that. So with that being said, Dr. Newman, take us away. You have the floor.
Oh, great. Can I get a quick thumbs up to make sure people can hear me?
I can hear you, so I believe everybody else can as well.
Okay, great. I've had technical issues in the past, so I just wanted to double check before I get started. Really, great work, Rich. Thank you so much for making this server and for that nice little introduction. I was laughing to myself when you said that you were looking for a place to have these serious discussions about Austrian economics, and it wasn't just inundated with memes and that sort of thing. I was laughing because like one of the main draws to me to the server at the beginning was I was looking for some fun Austrian economics memes. So that's what drew me to the server, and of course the discussion and especially the questions and answers and that sort of thing is great in the server, and these events are wonderful too. I've been in the past I've been using these sorts of events as a chance for me to do some like pre-paper brainstorming because I know the people in this server are really bright and have done all of their reading. They've read their Man Economy and State and all sorts of other books and articles. And so I know I can soundboard some ideas for projects that are really in the very early stages here and get some good feedback and good directions to go based on what the questions that I get and other discussion that it starts. So I'm going to do the same this time. You might remember the last time I did this, it was I was talking about Crisis in Leviathan, but it was a Crisis in Hydra. I was applying Robert Higgs' thesis to government control over money and banking, basically talking about the ratchet effect in how government takes over money and banking. And that went over well, and that actually turned into a project, and I'm happy to say that it looks like it's coming to completion here pretty soon. And that pretty much got started here in this Discord server in a conference like this. But for tonight, what I wanted to soundboard off of you guys is this idea that I've had, really sort of a swirling ideas that have to do with what's been happening with the Fed recently. So if you don't know, the Fed has been suffering huge losses, which sort of sounds strange to say because the Fed is a money printer. The Fed is a central bank and has the authority to issue new U.S. dollars. So to say the word loss in the same sentence as the Fed, I mean, except for the Fed causes us all to lose, something like that. To put those concepts together is sort of strange, but it's happening. And what usually happens is the Fed makes some money. So like they have all these assets that are earning interest. They're getting this return from all the assets that they hold, like mortgages and government debt. And the return that they get on their assets is greater than what they're paying for their liabilities. And so they have this leftover money. The Fed gets this leftover money through their operations. And what they do with this leftover money is they pay for their own operations. So they use it to pay their own salaries and which is growing, by the way. They're employing tons and tons and tons of economists, and that their payroll is getting greater and greater. But in excess of their operating costs, they remit the rest to the Treasury. So the U.S. Treasury gets this nice bit of extra cash from the Fed whenever the Fed earns this money, and that's how it's operated. There was only one other exception back in the early days of the Fed in 1915, I think it was, when this happened, where the Fed started incurring losses. But it's happening again today, and it's huge. It's like I think so. Well, the main guy that I've been reading on this is Alex Pollock. I highly recommend you check out his work. He's got some books, but he's also got some articles. He writes for AEI, but he also has some Mises Daily articles about what's going on with the Fed and the losses that it's incurring. And he's saying that the Fed will get up to $100 billion worth of losses by September, I think he said. Let me tell you the name of the article. You can check it out. So, this is a Mises Wire article. Who owns Federal Reserve losses, and how will they impact monetary policy? And that's an article by Alex Pollock and a co-author. So I highly recommend you check that out. And anyway, so I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about the implications of Fed losses. And the reason why is because we see the money that the Fed makes, and we just sort of like shrug it off as like, well, yeah, they're a money printer, so it's easy for them to make money. That this is just a sort of a collateral, sort of like a side effect of the fact that they're a money printer. That yeah, they're going to own assets that are earning interest, and then they're going to have this extra that goes to the government. It's just basic seigniorage. Well, I guess I should say it's complex seigniorage. It's a little bit more complex than seigniorage has been in the past. But then that leads to the question, okay, so how do we think about the Fed incurring losses? Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing, or is it a cost to taxpayers? And if it's a cost to taxpayers, in what sense is it a cost to taxpayers? Because the Fed buys these assets with newly created dollars, and so it's new money that's been used to purchase these assets, and so it's already a cost that's being imposed on everybody. So is this an additional cost, or is this just an overlap of that? So I've been thinking through all of this, and I promise I'm going to cut to the chase. There's a punchline here, or at least a conclusion that I think I've drawn. But let me put a pin in that, and also bring in some other literature that I've been reading. I've been reading a former colleague of mine, Arkadiusz Sierra, and he wrote this article. It was a chapter in a book. I think it's Austrian Economics in the 21st Century. Joseph Salerno was one of the editors of that book, and he has this chapter in there. It's called Monetary Policy After the Coronavirus Crisis, and here he's just describing the way that central bank operations have changed, and monetary policy has changed so much just in the past few years since the coronavirus crisis. So there was a huge bout of unconventional monetary policy that happened in 2008, 2009, and really in the years after, as the Fed was responding to the financial crisis and recession back then. And we called that unconventional monetary policy because they were doing quantitative easing, and the Fed's balance sheet was getting massive, and they were pushing interest rates down to zero. And so all of these things were very unconventional. We hadn't really seen that sort of thing before. But then they did it again, but bigger and faster. So in the coronavirus crisis, the way the Fed responded was with more unconventional monetary policy. And so Sierra makes this claim that he doesn't use this term, but they're conventionalizing unconventional monetary policy. So like the Fed is buying all sorts of new assets. They're not just buying government debt anymore. They're buying mortgages and all sorts of things. In the past couple of years, they've done this like Main Street lending program. Yeah, that's what it's called, Main Street lending program, where they're trying to target small and medium-sized businesses. That might just be like a PR sort of thing, and not like a well thought out monetary policy program. But the point is that they're definitely broadening the categories of assets that they're purchasing. So unconventional monetary policy is becoming conventional. That's the point. The Fed is acting strangely, and as I've just discussed, based on Pollock's articles, we're getting these strange results. Okay, so there's one other element here that I want to bring in, and that is all of the recent Fed reports and BIS reports about central bank digital currencies. So all of these agencies are issuing their little reports on how do we best do a central bank digital currency, or what would be the implications of doing a central bank digital currency this way, or what if we did it that way, and there's trade-offs and there's pros and cons, and there's like usually 2 paragraphs about privacy, which I think is a huge issue, by the way. I don't think that we could overstate the threat of the privacy issue with the central bank digital currency. But the point is that they're talking about this, but then whenever I see the Fed at some sort of congressional hearing, somebody will ask them about a central bank digital currency, and the Powell will say, "Oh, we would never do this without congressional approval." So like they're talking about it, they were issuing all these reports and discussions and papers and everything. But then they'll say, "Oh, but we're not going to do it quite yet. We're going to make sure that we have the authority to do it." Okay, so now to wrap all of that together, I'll go ahead and jump to the end here. My conclusion, I think, is that central bank digital currencies are coming sooner than we might think. I think when we read those reports and we hear the rhetoric from the Federal Reserve people, that I think the timeline that we have in our head, or at least in my head in the past, it's been like 5, 10, 15 years maybe, that sort of time frame. But based on the huge losses that the Fed is incurring, and based on the fact that they've ramped up all this unconventional stuff, and the fact that they can fix the seigniorage problem pretty easily with the central bank digital currency, and I'll talk about that in a second. I think what that means is we should. I'm not making a prediction, but I think the time frame that we should be thinking a central bank digital currency would be implemented would be in like 1 to 2 years maybe. I definitely still think I've made this claim before. I think it'll come with a crisis. So like we'll see a crisis, some sort of economic or financial crisis hit, and then the Fed will use that as a way to squeeze in the central bank digital currency, and they may do it with or without congressional authorization. I don't think the Fed really cares that much about that. It might be the sort of thing that they implement in a soft sort of way, and then beg forgiveness instead of asking permission first. Anyway, so that's just what I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about how the Fed losses and all this unconventional monetary policy could be paving the way for a central bank digital currency, and it could come sooner than we realize. Okay, so why do I think this? So with central bank digital currencies, there's 2 main categories. There's a wholesale version and a retail version. And if you have a retail version, you'd probably also have a wholesale version. But a wholesale CBDC would just be between banks, and it would basically just be a payment system between banks and the Fed. And people don't really talk about this much, and probably for good reason. And the reason they don't talk about it is because it really wouldn't have that much of an effect, because there's already a payment system between commercial banks and the Fed. And it doesn't seem like there's any sort, at least from a consumer's perspective, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of like big bottleneck. It doesn't seem like there's any like huge costs associated with that would be solved by a different technology. And if there is a different technology that they would implement and they would call it a wholesale CBDC, it just seems like it seems like it wouldn't have that much of an effect for the consumer. Now, a big asterisk here is that I do think it would have a big effect for the consumer to the extent that a wholesale CBDC would pave the way for a retail CBDC. So like, because the government, they go step by step. So like if a necessary step to get to a retail CBDC is you have to do a wholesale one first, well then there are huge issues with the wholesale, and we should throw up the red flags and be fighting against a wholesale CBDC just as much as we would a retail, for the simple reason that we expect one to lead to the other. Hope that makes sense. but but I don't think that there's any sort of like huge economic consequences to a wholesale CBDC, simply because it would just be a substitute for the current sort of payment system that and clearing system that banks already have. Now, a retail CBDC is that's a whole different story. A retail CBDC would be central bank money that the consumer can use, that you and I could use, that we could get paid in this, that we could pay for things with this. And it's sort of hard to imagine what it will look like because the Fed has been really vague about what they might do, and it could be that they don't even know what they might do. It could be that they're just putting feelers out, trying to see what would it look like from the consumer's perspective to use and spend central bank digital currency. Now, so one big categorization is between a wholesale and a retail CBDC. Within the retail, there's another categorization that people are talking about, and that is an intermediated CBDC and an unintermediated one. An intermediated one simply means that the Fed issues this central bank digital currency, but it doesn't get to consumers' hands except through banks. So like you still have to go through normal banking operations like deposits and withdrawals to end up with the central bank digital currency. In the same way that's how you end up with cash. Like you don't walk up to the Federal Reserve Bank and knock on the door and give them your debit card and swipe it to exchange it for cash. Well, in that sort of sense, cash is also intermediated. So the other way is an unintermediated one where it's almost like you have a bank account with the Fed. So an unintermediated retail CBDC it seems to me would be the same as like you just have a checking account with the Federal Reserve, and you can spend and withdraw the central bank digital currency. Well, I don't know how you would withdraw it. I don't know how you would like take the money out like in the form of physical cash. But the point is that you wouldn't go through an intermediary. There would be like a Fed app on your phone or something like that. And that's how you would spend the money. So I don't think that the unintermediated retail CBDC is likely, for the simple reason that the Federal Reserve is a part of a system, and they've got there's a bunch of big players that they work with that do not want competition. So like the big commercial banks, they want to still be able to issue their or attract deposits and lend based on that. They don't want competition. They still want to do their own operations that way. They don't want competition from the Fed. And if the Fed do that, that would be huge competition, because you're competing with the money printer. Anyway, so that's why I think an intermediated CBDC is more likely, simply to get the special interests on board with you. Okay, so the next question is, why would a central bank want to issue this? And I've already mentioned the privacy thing. So there's this, the privacy issue is huge. The Fed wants to know how you're spending your money. The Fed wants to know who's getting paid how much. The Fed wants to be able to, or the federal government in general wants to be able to see who's trying to evade taxes. They want to be able to send welfare payments and do all sorts of transfers in an easy way. They want to know what you're buying. So I think the invasion of privacy is a huge part of this from the government's perspective in general, not just the Fed. But I think the Fed is also interested in removing the privacy that cash and anonymity that cash offers. But if we have a central bank digital currency, there's no more privacy. There's no more anonymity. There's no way for anybody to avoid any sort of tax ever again. So that's one big issue. Another big issue, another reason why I think the central bank would want to issue this, and this is right around the time I was thinking about this and reading up on this stuff, I ran across this tweet from George Selgin where he was talking about seniorage and central banks wanting to issue what? Well, I think I have it pulled up right here. What did he say? Basically he was saying that monetary institutions evolve based on seniorage considerations. So like how much can the government make by being the monopoly issuer of the currency? How much do they earn? How much do they make by doing that? So so I was thinking about how does a central bank digital currency increase seniorage? How does it make the central bank how does it put it in a position to give more money to the treasury? So how does the government benefit financially from issuing a central bank digital currency? And of course there are some obvious considerations, like if people start using this central bank digital currency more than cash, so like they substitute away from cash, and so there's less demand for cash and more demand for central bank digital currency, well, that means that they don't have to spend money on printing the dollars anymore. So like even the like cheap and expensive paper money, there's still some tiny little cost to doing it. But if we get rid of all cash and totally switch over to the CBDC, well then you can just, like, it's literally you press a button. You don't even have to start the printing press. You just press a button and you can create more of them. So it's not just virtually costless, like it is costless for them to create more of it. So that's an obvious consideration. But another thing that I've been thinking about, and this has literally been like just the past couple of days I've been thinking about this. So I'm really sorry if this is all sort of unformed and in a very underdeveloped state. It's because it is. I think another way that the Fed could dramatically increase seniorage, especially in the case where there's less demand for physical cash and more demand for the central bank digital currency, is they can impose negative interest rates on it easily. So that is something that the Fed has never been able to do. So like no matter what, you cannot impose a negative interest rate on physical cash, and the reason why is because it's physical. It's like there's not a way to suck a physical dollar off of a stack of dollars that's sitting in somebody's wallet or in somebody's safe at home. But with a digital currency that you have, whether it's intermediated or not, with a digital currency, that's a piece of cake. Like you could literally just plug in the number and say we're going to charge this sort of fee on the currency that's held over a certain time, and it's easy. They could easily do that. So that would be it's a central bank liability because it's money that's issued by the central bank that actually earns them money. So it's weird to call it a liability because they could earn money by imposing negative interest rates with the central bank digital currency, and this would be something that they never could have done with physical cash. And the fact that people could always withdraw cash from the banking system was always a thorn in the side of the Fed, because if they're trying to keep interest rates targeted at a certain level, and whenever there's a crisis and people are panicky, and so they pull their money out of the banks, and that causes the Fed to be in a position where they have to do even more expansionary monetary policy to push down the interest rates, then this just means that the Fed would have like perfect, very precise control over interest rates and also bank runs. They would basically be able to penalize people for holding on to the thing that they've withdrawn from the bank. So like if you wanted to stop people from pulling money out of the bank, then you could literally just change the fee that you're charging on the use and holding of this asset that you're pulling from the bank in such a way to disincentivize you from withdrawing your money. So like you face this choice. Well, do I keep my money in the bank that I think is going to fail, or do I pull it out of the bank and turn it into a central bank digital currency that I hold that's going to suffer this negative interest rate? And you could see what I'm talking about. So you could see how the Fed would have this like very precise control over everything, not just invasion of privacy, but they would have really tight control over transmission of their monetary policy, and also in their attempt to quell bank runs, panics. Okay, so that's just what I've been thinking about, like why central banks would want to issue a central bank digital currency. It's cheap, it's an invasion of privacy, they would have tight control over monetary policy. I read this other paper by I'm not sure I can pronounce his name. It's Bereswell. It was in, his article is called "Would a Retail Central Bank Digital Currency Achieve Its Intended Purpose?" And this is in a recent 2-volume set, Festschrift for Huerta de Soto, Emergence of a Tradition. And in this article, Bereswell is talking about whether or not a central bank digital currency would achieve its intended purposes. And he lists some of the purposes that it would have. And one thing that he's talking about, so I agree with what he's saying in there. There's one little point of disagreement that I have, or maybe not a disagreement, but just a question mark, is he talks about the issue of the Federal Reserve taking on additional credit risk. So if people are they're drawing down their bank deposits and turning it into a central bank digital currency, then they would have to charge a negative interest rate. And the reason why is the Fed would want to limit how much credit risk they're taking on. So if you go back to that situation I was talking about before, where people are withdrawing their money from the banks, if they're turning it into a central bank digital currency, this means that the Fed, in order for them to keep their targeted interest rate the same, they would have to do more credit expansion. They have to purchase more assets from these banks, and that means the Fed is going to have to buy more mortgages and more government debt. And so Bereswell is making this point that the Fed, by issuing the central bank digital currency and offering something attractive for people to use to make payments over like large distances and stuff like that, that's not a bank deposit, then what that means is the Fed would be putting themselves in this position where they could have to take on a lot of credit risk. And so my one question is, like, why does the Fed care about credit risk? Like they literally are a money printer. So why do they care about how much their assets might be losing in value? And so reading this, it really brought it all full circle, because that brought me back to the current situation that the Federal Reserve is in. And the current situation is that the Fed is posting huge losses. They're paying huge amounts of interest compared to what they're earning. And so that's why I gave you the conclusion ahead of time. That's why my conclusion is that I think they might be looking at these losses, and which, by the way, they call a delayed asset. So when the Fed incurs a loss, you might be wondering what happens with the money, who pays for this? And the answer is it just delays when the Fed will start making the positive remittances back to the Treasury. So like if they're down $100 billion, and that's how much of delayed asset they've accrued, that's remittances that they haven't paid, it means that they will wait until they earn $100 billion again in excess of their operating costs. And then once they do that, then they will restart the remittances to the Treasury. So I forgot where I was going with that. But the point is that with the Fed losses, if they want to go back to earning money for the government, and if the government wants them to do that for them, then I think we could see a central bank digital currency sooner rather than later. So I'm just sort of, when I said 1 to 2 year timeline, that's sort of arbitrary. In the past, I've been thinking, yeah, we'll probably see a central bank digital currency in like 10 years ish or something like that. That was the timeline that I just had in my head based on the timing of the rhetoric and the papers from the Fed and everything. But now after reading this stuff and doing more research into the benefits that the central bank would have with a digital currency, I think it could be sooner than we expect. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Q&A. I have no idea how long I talked because we're sort of going by a different schedule, but thanks everyone.
Thank you very much. All right, so we have a few questions here in the chat. The first one comes from my fellow Mises apprentice, David Brady. Hi, David. Nice to see you here. And he asks, what is Dr. Newman's favorite thing about Rich?
I think making the Discord servers, so making a great place to discuss Austrian economics and much maybe to Rich's dismay, memes, the Econ Memes channel. I love to go there and check out the memes.
The memes are a nice cherry on top for everything else. I will say that. The next question here comes from Ethosine, and he asks, Dr. Newman, thank you for speaking with us. What is your position on fractional reserve banking?
I'm against it. I try to avoid all of the fraud debate simply because that usually goes nowhere. But I do think that it is inherently unstable. I think that it's only practicable if you've got, or sustainable if you've got government backing, if you've got some sort of protection, bailout, deposit insurance, or a central bank that's holding it all together.
Next question here comes from Hexfile, and he asks, Dr. Newman, recently some within the BRICS trade bloc have been floating the idea of a gold-backed settlement currency for bloc members. Assuming Gresham's law applies, what do you think this means for the future of the petrodollar system?
I'm going to have to take a pass on that. Unfortunately, I'm not well read on what BRICS is doing. I have seen that they are in headlines, but I haven't looked at the technical details of what you're talking about there. So I would not be able to say one way or the other at all. Sorry.
That's perfectly fine. For the next question here, comes from Empirical Cat, and he asks, what other areas of social sciences do you think praxeology could be better applied to outside of economics and ethics? And what are your thoughts on agorism and its criticism of the practicality of political means?
So I think that psychology is big. My friend Ash Navabi has written a little bit about a praxeological approach to psychology, which is really interesting. And it's like based on what can we say about human motivation and human behavior in a way that's like universally true, or based on like those sorts of simple starting assumptions. So I think psychology. I've seen previous colleagues use praxeology to talk about violent interaction, and of course Rothbard has a huge section on this in the Man-Economy State and Power and Market, where he's categorized violent exchange. But there is a way to think about contest in war and even game theory. I think there's a way to consider game theory in a praxeological way, or at least in a way that's not like the rest of the befallen mathematical neoclassical economics. That's just what comes to the top of my head. The next question was on agorism. Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, sure. The second part of the question is, what are your thoughts on agorism and its criticism of the practicality of political means? I guess criticism on the practicality of like political action.
Sure. I'm not the one to tell somebody that that they shouldn't employ the strategy that they think is correct. Of course, I mean I have my own opinions, and I'm pretty apolitical myself. Yeah, I don't really have many thoughts on like which one is best. I really do. I think this is sort of like a cop-out answer. I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on their skills. What can they do? What interests do they have? What can they keep going and find success, not just politically and broadly, but also personally, because that matters. Like, if you're going to employ some sort of strategy, you've got to be able to sustain it in your own life with, like, while you're also living inside of a family in a community. So like, if you're going to do some sort of strategy like agorism, it would be best to do that with a family that can go along with you and in a community that can go along with you, as opposed to you just trying to stick it to the man and be apolitical, to the detriment of your family and your community. I hope I'm making sense. It's really sort of out of my wheelhouse, but those are my thoughts.
All right, next question here comes from me. And my question is, do you think there's any sort of link between the recent sort of conversation and buzz around central bank digital currencies and the recent rise of magic money theory, also known as modern monetary theory? Do you think those two are linked in any way?
They're definitely linked. I'm not sure the extent of like how directly they're linked, but they're definitely linked, because they're both either a product of something else, like they're just a product of our times, or there's some sort of direct connection there. I do think that a central bank digital currency would be the MMTers' dream. Like, if the MMTers are basically just unashamed inflationists, is all they are, and a central bank digital currency gives the central bank lots of new tools, and it makes it really easy for them to inflate. So, I just now thought about this, and it also helps them with taxes. So the MMTers also talk about the use of taxation as a way to increase and decrease the demand for money. So like, if there's too much inflation, then you can increase taxes. And you can imagine, if we have a cashless society and everybody's using a central bank digital currency, well, then taxation becomes really easy. Like, if you can just lop off you don't even have to do any reporting anymore. Like, if the government can just lop off a certain amount of money that's in your account based on its own calculations, its own its own tax code, however it wants to implement it, then MMTers would love that. They would love the ability to tinker with money demand through taxes with central bank digital currency. So the short answer to your question is, I don't know of any direct links, but I wouldn't be surprised.
All right. Next question here comes from Norduljos, I think is how it's pronounced. But he says, not sure if it's easy to answer, but do you think Austro-libertarianism is compatible with Thomism? If so, how are both communities interacting currently in favor of spreading philosophical knowledge?
I don't know. That is a good question, and I do know that there are lots of Thomists who are Austrians and libertarians, and these are the sorts of discussions that I listen in on as opposed to participate.
Next question here comes from Jacob PD, and he asks, what exactly is Fed now, and how is that related to central bank digital currencies? George Selgin argues that it's not quite the same as a CBDC, but he's not sure what the debate is all about.
Yeah, I've seen Selgin post about this, and I think he's right based on what I know. I don't think Fed now is a central bank digital currency. If you'll remember, in my talk, I talked about the wholesale CBDC, which is that it's basically just a payment system between banks and the Fed. And so, like, to the extent that Fed now is that, and if you define a wholesale CBDC that way, well, then yeah, Fed now is a wholesale CBDC. But if you have a narrower definition of what counts as a central bank digital currency, and by narrower I mean, like, if you constrain it to say that it's got to be on a decentralized ledger, or it's got to have a certain type of cryptography behind it, similar to Bitcoin, well, then no, I don't think Fed now is that. So what I'm saying is that if you make a general definition of wholesale CBDC, then there's probably a way to fit Fed now into that. But if you have a narrower definition of what would count as a wholesale CBDC, then FedNow probably doesn't count.
All right.
But
Yeah.
either way, like I said, I don't think it matters, except to the extent that it is a step closer to a retail CBDC. So that might sound a little strange to hear me say that I don't think a wholesale CBDC matters, but I just don't see like how it would fundamentally change the way the banking system currently operates. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but it just seems to me that if the Fed thinks that they can find efficiencies in their clearing system um, and general payment system with a different technology, and that technology looks like a digital currency, then all you're doing is you're just speeding up the transactions in the Fed space, in the commercial banking Federal Reserve System space. But I don't see how that would have any sort of impact on us on the broader consumer level.
All right, we'll do one last question here. Whenever we do these conferences where we have multiple speakers, we usually try to have one last question that we'll ask everybody just to see what everyone's different answers are. So, last question we'll ask you is: how do you think we can best spread knowledge of Austrian economics to the next generation and then future generations after that?
Oh, good question. um, I think you have to. Man, this is going to sound really cheesy. I think you have to collaborate. I think you have to work together, and the reason why I say that is because, uh, like the best work that I have done, and this might just be because um, I'm a subpar scholar myself, but the best work I've done has been stuff that I've done with other people. So like if I'm working with somebody else and bouncing ideas off of them, and also just like the nitty gritty detail type work where we're revising each other's work and editing on like a even on like a grammatical level, just making sure that what we're writing is best. I think that's how you produce the best work. Another reason why collaboration is huge is because I've read a bunch of stuff, and my co-author has read a bunch of stuff, but it's a lot of, and there's some overlap, but there's a lot of stuff that I've read that he hasn't, or the stuff that he's read that I haven't. And so like when we stumble upon some idea that we need to discuss and hash out in whatever project we're working on together, um, it's very beneficial to have that broader knowledge set, and that broader knowledge set is based on like collective reading. And so um, that's huge. Also working together, it's just good for the soul. I would say it makes it more fun as opposed to just typing at your computer by yourself. And I know you can collaborate like over computers, so I don't mean like physically at your computer by yourself, but like if you're just working on something alone, it's not as fun as working on something with somebody else who has that broader knowledge set, who can check your work and you can check theirs, and you can converse about it and learn from each other. So, man, wasn't that a cheesy answer?
I think that was a perfectly fine answer. Um, do you have anything you want to plug? Anywhere people can find you at before we move on here?
Yes, I do want to plug the Mises book clubs, which are coming up. So I'm going to be leading a book club on For New Liberty, and we're going to meet on Tuesday evenings, and it's virtual. I already have some great students who are signed up. It's for undergraduate students, um, and I'm sure there's plenty of undergraduate students listening in here. But even if you aren't, if you know some undergraduate students, please send them my way. And you can go to the website. Oh yeah,
Yep.
mises.org/events/Mises Book Club. So please register to join that. We're gonna have a great time, and it'll be light and easy, discussion based. There's not going to be any sort of quizzes or tests or anything. But in terms of like where to find me, probably Twitter is best. I'm at Newman J_R. So thanks again, Rich, for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for being here. All right, we're going to see if we can